May everyone please stand for a flag salute. Thank you. Ms. Fennick, may you please do the roll call?
Sure. Thank you. Mrs. Bays?
Present.
Mrs. Epstein?
Present.
Dr. Block?
Not present.
Ms. Brooks?
Here.
Ms. Gilliard?
Here.
Mrs. Melconian?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to recess to executive session to discuss a personnel matter, seek guidance from counsel, and potential litigation.
Do I have a second? Ms. Brooks, second. May I have a vote, please? We are 6-0. We are convening into executive session.
Can I make a motion to reconvene into public session, please?
May I have a second? Ms. Brooks, may I have a vote, please? 6-0. Thank you. Ms. Fennick, may you do the roll call again, please?
Yes, thank you. Mrs. Bays,
Present.
Mrs. Epstein,
Present.
Dr. Block,
We believe he's en route, but he's absent for now.
okay. Ms. Brooks,
I'm here.
Ms. Gilliard,
Here.
Mrs. Melconian,
Here.
and Mr. Smith.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, may I have a motion to adopt the agenda of March 8th, 2022? Ms. Epstein, do I have a second? Somebody seconded? Ms. Brooks, thank you. May I have a vote, please? 6-0. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome everybody again. March 8th, Board of Education meeting. I am going to concede my time to Dr. Hines. I'm sorry.
All right, good evening, everyone. Just a quick update regarding some of the things that have taken place throughout the school district. First, Dr. Shields, if you can just give us an enrollment report.
Of course, Dr. Hines. The last enrollment report was calculated on March 2nd. At that point, we had 5,235 students. That's 10 more students than we had at this point last year.
Great, thank you, Dr. Shields. Regarding general information, I have three things I'd like to update the community about. The first is, if you didn't know, we have a State of the District, which will take place here on March 15th. I believe the start time is 7 p.m. I'm hoping you are able to join us live here physically, and if you can't, it will be live streamed. We're looking at about a 45-minute presentation, and then I'll open up to questions for about 45 minutes or so for questions that the community may have. Also, the following day, I know the Parents' Council, we have another opportunity to discuss the State of the District the following evening, and I believe it's taking place in the library at Schreiber. Is that correct, Ms. Mawani? Maybe. All right, so TBD as far as where that will take place, but I look forward to that. For those of you who don't know, the State of the District really is just that, just like when you hear the State of the Union or the State of the State, we're really focusing on where we are at the moment and where we are moving toward. I've been looking forward to this since I began here almost 3 years ago, so I look forward to you being here. The second has to do with just a really quick update. Now that we are in a different position from a masking standpoint, I've reconvened our Caffeine with Mike, and it's always a pleasure to have our community members come out and have an organic discussion with no agenda, just about things that are on their minds. One of the things that surfaced at the last Caffeine with Mike last week had to do with trauma, and trauma as it relates to students, trauma as it relates to staff, and what the implications are. And I think more important, what is the district doing about that, certainly related to what's happened over the past 2 years. And so I talked about this study. It's called the ACEs study. I'm not going to get into it right now, but it's something that is very informative for us to think about what we can certainly do moving forward. And at some point, I'm working with Dr. Allen. I'm hoping by the end of March, we can have some professional development with our administrators related to this very important topic, and I look forward to updating the board and the school community about that. The last thing I want to talk about is saying thank you to our school community, to our students, certainly to our wonderful staff since last Wednesday. As we have moved toward mask optional, it has been an incredible thing to witness. I've been in all of our schools over that time. I've listened to feedback not only from students but from staff and parents as well. We should all be very proud as to how we have transitioned from last week to where we are right now in a myriad of ways. Everybody has, I think, been incredibly respectful of people's choices, and we will continue to move forward, I think, in a very positive direction. So kudos to everybody in our school district as we move forward, and I want to thank this board, and I want to thank, again, our staff over the past 2 years. They have been incredibly difficult, but you have all been leaders in your own ways as we have moved forward. Thank you.
Is there a report from the District Protocol Committee, Dr. Shields?
I think Dr. Hines said it very well. Our next committee meeting will be in 2 weeks. But the feedback that we got today from the district-wide committee was very positive on the transition as it's taken place over the last 2 weeks.
Thank you. Okay, we are moving on now to community comments. If there, 3-minute limit stands as always.
Jessica Melwani.
Jessica Melwani, Manor Haven parent and co-president of the Port Washington Parents Council. I know we'll be hearing from our facilities department tonight on its budgetary needs for capital improvements across the district. On behalf of our elementary school HSAs, I ask the board to create guidelines for playground funding and improvements as soon as possible. Whether a school is in the midst of a major playground project today, or will be embarking on one a couple of months or years down the road, it is a matter of when, not if, all of our playgrounds will require attention and investment. And it is critical for all the elementary parent organizations to understand the scope of their potential financial obligations and opportunities with as much time to plan as possible. Recognizing that our schools are not the same in terms of enrollment, outdoor space, and many other factors, parents need to understand how the district will contribute to the replacement or enhancement of playground equipment in a way that ensures equity across all buildings and access to safe, healthy outdoor play for all students. Once our HSAs have clarity on what improvements the board will fund as, for lack of a better term, reasonable and customary, and how those determinations are made, they can assess the need or opportunity to enhance the outdoor facilities through private fundraising. On that note, we must acknowledge that our HSAs do not have the same fundraising capabilities across the board. There is variance across buildings and even within buildings year to year. I would ask our district administration, which has emphasized play as a critical component of education, to provide our HSAs with clear and consistent guidance as to the level of enhancement they can pursue through private funding. Just because one school can have far superior facilities through private contributions does not necessarily mean it should. Such guidelines will help ensure equity for all district elementary students. Most importantly, our elementary HSAs and our whole parent community should understand the rubric guiding all of this decision-making so that we can act in true partnership with building and district administration to improve the quality of outdoor play for all elementary students in Port Washington. Thank you.
Hi, Evelyn Gabriel. Thank you, Jessica, for that. Good evening, Port Washington admins and board members, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I wanted to first thank everyone up there for their hard work, especially the last few years dealing with the pandemic. I'm glad to start seeing COVID in our rearview mirror and continuing to stay focused on the children in our community. I came here tonight to speak briefly about the budget. As you know, I've been following the budget very closely, and I've always been bringing to the forefront the facilities, the schoolyards, the playgrounds, and the fields, and of course our school buildings. Something that is extremely important to this community as a whole. School playgrounds are a huge deal in this town, especially due to the lack of town parks we have, leaving most of us to rely on our school playgrounds and fields for extracurricular activities. A BO member told us today during a meeting, and I really need to remind the community of this again. We have a superintendent who believes in play, who strongly believes in recess, and who understands how important growth is for a child through all different kinds of play. Bringing me to my point of the true importance of upkeeps of playgrounds and purchases of new playground equipment, and of course the upkeep of all of our baseball, softball, lacrosse, and football fields. I will forever be an advocate for our athletes of all ages. The past few months really divided us as a community. I know many parents are angry, I know. I fought right beside you all for parental choice for our children, and our fight is far from over with our local legislators, and we have more obstacles laying ahead of us. We have a lot of work to do. But this is to my community. We need to band together now as parents and truly see how important this budget is and what it truly means for our kids' future in this district. Our kids have suffered so much these past 2 years that they deserve everything we can control to give them. And we can control passing this budget as parents and stakeholders of this town. So please tonight, everybody watching, pay attention to everything regarding this budget and pay attention to what will happen if it doesn't pass. Every one of our kids will be affected if this does not pass, and if there was ever a time to unite as parents, now's the time. So Port Washington, I'm looking forward to a future for our kids to play, our athletes to compete on the fields, and us parents to unite to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? No. Okay, we'll move on to our discussion items. The first discussion item for this evening is regarding our budget, and it is regarding athletics, fine arts, facilities, and transportation requests. Turn it over to you, Ms. O'Hara.
Thank you, President Bays. Good evening, everybody. So this is our third work session, and I would just like to thank Jessica Mack for all of her input with this budget and all of the administrators who have helped throughout this entire process. We started back in November, and, I'm going the wrong way.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? Ms. Fennick, we need to take roll call again, or can you just mark Dr. Block present?
I'm just going to mark Dr. Block that he arrived at 8 p.m.
Tardy, Dr. Block has arrived. Okay. Back to you, Ms. O'Hara.
So again, this is our third budget workshop. We do have a budget workshop on March 22nd that will cover the revenue and review personnel, the ELL budget, the BOCES, driver's ed, and adult ed. And then if you'll notice, at the April 12th meeting, the budget should be adopted. I'm thinking if the board saw fit, if we could add an extra budget workshop so that we could discuss different scenarios and have final discussions about the budget.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, do you have a suggestion as to when?
Yeah. Wait. I don't necessarily support that. I think we have lots of meetings. We have a meeting today. I'm not 100% sure why we need to add to the current meeting schedule.
I think the question, but what Ms. O'Hara was suggesting is that before we get to the final adoption of the budget, the board may need another meeting beforehand to know what the actual proposed budget is. Otherwise, we could, if the board agreed, have the final number that is, there might be different scenarios of if you wanted to be at the cap, below the cap, above the cap, we would have to be prepared to vote on it the same night on April 12th.
So can we decide on April 12th if we need?
Before April 12th, we'd
Yeah,
have to
so-
decide that, yes.
Can we ask Ms. O'Hara when she's thinking we would add this session and maybe go from there? I mean, I'm loath to tell our Assistant Superintendent for Business that we don't need an extra session to discuss if she thinks we need an extra session to discuss.
I agree with you, Ms. Gilliar. I agree.
I was thinking April 5th, I believe it's a Tuesday. Because that would give you March 22nd to hear the final departments, and then I could put everything together and have different scenarios. But if you like all of this, just March 22nd, we're going to be discussing personnel, and that's going to be quite involved. So I think it would be prudent to have one more budget session, but.
This is an evening session? An evening session?
Yes.
I just want to try to pull up the calendar. I just feel like we have a lot of meetings that we can't repurpose. Maybe we can use like a budget meeting. and
But it
all
would
meet
be
in
a
the morning,
budget meeting that would be a work
And we all come
session.
and meet in the morning.
If
Like,
a
I'm just
work
trying to,
session.
yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to necessarily be an evening meeting
That's
is
what I'm
what
trying to
you're
figure out.
saying.
Yeah,
So
that's what-
when's the next budget
I'm
meeting?
trying to pull
Okay,
that. I don't,
so why don't we just table,
so Julie says April 11th. Is that too late?
I think that's too late for this
Do you want
board.
to pull it to the previous week, maybe?
Okay, here's my suggestion, because I think we're going back and forth. I think what I've heard from Ms. O'Hara is that we should have another session before, for the board to know what our options are before we get to the April 12th meeting, where we would be adopting the option. So we will work on the details on whether it's a daytime evening during a budget time, or if it's an evening meeting, and then it'll be a full work session of the board, so the entire board will be present. okay? And then we can figure that out amongst ourselves. Go ahead, Ms. Gilliard.
So just a comment, for my personal schedule, either one is fine, and I think for all of us, as long as we can all be present, either one is fine. I'm concerned about having our last budget discussion be during the day when it's traditionally at night, and have the community miss that that's when that conversation is happening, and feel that they've been cut out of watching the process. I don't know that that necessarily means we can't do it, but if we were to do it, I think it needs to be very heavily publicized, because we need everybody on board and having seen the discussion of why we're endorsing whatever plan we're ultimately endorsing.
That makes perfect sense, except we've had a lot of these evening budget meetings, and they're not very well attended, so
I think
Yeah.
there are people who are watching at home later on, you know, I
Well, it would still be streamed.
we also, look, it's just something to keep in mind, right? We want to make sure that the budget process is very transparent, and particularly that final discussion tends to be one that people who are paying attention to the budget want to look at. So we just want to make sure people know where to look.
Ms. Epstein?
I just wanted to follow up that, again, once we adopt the budget, as a board and with Ms. O'Hara, we do travel around within the community and have several opportunities to have lengthy discussions with the community and answer their questions and reflect on the budget and how we came to these answers. So I don't know that they would be missing out from so much of our discussion in a work session, because we do have those one-on-one where they can actually question us and we answer them in those meetings, as a point of clarification.
Okay, let's move on with your presentation. I think we'll figure out a date, but thank you for pointing out that we'll find a date.
And also on April 12th, we'll have the opportunity to clearly communicate the budget and what's in the budget and what's not. So, and again, after that, May 3rd would be the public budget hearing. We'd have our annual budget vote and school board election on May 17th. As we've discussed in previous meetings, this is the 11th year of the tax levy threshold. And for the school district this year, with the current transfer to capital, we're at a 2.58% tax levy threshold, meaning that we could levy taxes 2.58% above last year's taxes and just have a simple majority vote. The goal is always to achieve a tax levy that's below our tax levy threshold, while being mindful of taxpayers during this unprecedented economic time, while maintaining and/or expanding all current instructional programs. Again, our focus has always been educating the whole child, and our decisions are guided by clearly defined strategic plans. We continue to pursue efficiencies in all areas of the district budget. We're faced with the economic landscape where we have increasing health insurance premiums, we have increased retirement system contributions, and we have increases to contractual costs due to inflation. We also this year have received $3.2 million additional state aid, which is really a good thing for the district because it helps offset,
2.3, right? You said 3.2.
It is 3.2. In total, it should be 6 point. Did I bet? I must have made them different. Well, I'll get back to you with the number.
Okay.
It's either 2.3 or 3.2. Sorry. So the district currently utilizes 4 of the 12 reserve funds that are available to it, and this is a good way of reserving and saving for the future. Some of the benefits of the reserve fund are it helps save for the future, maintains a stable operating budget, maintains a stable tax levy, and it boosts the district's overall fiscal strength. It's also a way of supplementing the limitations of the fund balance. So school districts are only allowed to carry a 4% fund balance. Most private organizations, it's recommended that they have a 10% fund balance. So using reserves allows you to put money aside and actually be a little closer to the 10%. So the reserves that Port Washington currently uses is a retirement contribution reserve, an employee benefit accrued liability reserve, a workers' comp reserve, and an unemployment insurance reserve. And later on, we're going to be discussing the benefits of a capital reserve. The first department we're going to be discussing is athletics. We have 49 athletic varsity and junior varsity level teams at the high school. We also have 32 teams at the middle school. We're very proud of the fact that over the last 10 years, 9 of those years, we've had scholar athletes at the buildings. So we're known as a school of distinction. So it's really encouraging to see that our students are successful on the playing field, but also in the classes. At the high school, we have over 23% participation, and at the middle school, we have over 16% participation. Some of the athletic requests, you'll notice the equipment codes have increased. Some of that is really just replacing outdated or worn equipment for lacrosse, football, soccer, and gymnastics. There's also an increase to the Project Adventure equipment to replace that as well. They're also requesting an additional 2.5 units for a JV football assistant coach position, and also an additional 4.0 units for middle school boys and girls winter track. And this is to address increasing enrollment numbers and just provide more opportunities at the middle school. So as you can see, this really just illustrates the yellow areas on this ST3 version of their budget. You'll see the slight increase in the equipment, which is really the Project Adventure repairs that are necessary. The contractual is going up really just $2,000, and that's just normal inflation increases. Next, we're going to move on to creative arts. So in this code, you'll see that some of the supply costs, they've increased significantly on all levels. This is because as we're able to go on more field trips with COVID, everything being a little more lax, we can go on more field trips. They can participate in honor ensembles and competitions. We can also have guest artist programs to enhance the whole child's education and support the vision and mission of the district. Also, use of technology and software applications for music and visual arts programs has also increased, and this benefits our students' unique learning experience. So typically, creative arts will each year purchase certain instruments so that students who are a little more economically challenged, they may not be able to afford renting or purchasing an instrument. This year I worked with Kevin Scully to actually look at alternatives to just purchasing outright and only a few instruments. And he worked with BOCES. And there's actually a program that's actually only a couple of years old with BOCES. We can actually lease instruments, and it's a lease to purchase at the end of the lease. So what we worked out was a 5-year lease term. We can actually purchase over 60 instruments. There's quite a few: violins, violas, cellos, and this is aidable in the following year. So you would get over 47% back in BOCES aid by doing this. So it's a really good way to get instruments into the hands of students quickly. And you'll notice in the actual budget lines, there's a decrease in our contractual expenses because through this lease, they'll cover the first year of any repairs. So we were able to decrease that line. We were also able to decrease some of the material purchases also because of the lease. So you'll also notice, so you'll see the BOCES line in yellow for $19,000. That's the cost for the lease for 1 year. So, and you'll see the decrease in some of the other codes to offset it. You'll also see a large decrease in the contractual and other. That's actually just a reclassification because that was where transportation for different trips was being taken out of, so we moved that to the transportation code. So next, unfortunately, Jim Restano isn't here today. He had some health issues, so he apologizes for not being here. Hopefully, I can answer our questions about facilities and operations, but if not, I will definitely get back to everybody. So the district has 7 school buildings, which is approximately 776,000 square feet of facilities to maintain. We have an administration building and 21 fields. The operation of facilities is really our custodial staff who clean, they set up for events, they make sure buildings are running smoothly. The maintenance of the facilities is more the plumbing and mechanics, the specialized trades like HVAC, electrical. And then we have our grounds department that maintains the fields and grounds. They do full cleanup, snow removal, and storm prep, and also the playground equipment. They also oversee any capital projects and construction. We have Jim Restano, the Director of Facilities. He represents the interest of the district and provides a working knowledge of the buildings for the construction management firms and architects. He really guides us through and holds them accountable for work that should be done. Now, the operation and maintenance of facility, you'll see a big increase in the 1620 code, which is the operation of plant. But then you'll see an offsetting decrease in the maintenance of plant right below it of 308,000. So the difference is because that's a reclassification. There were certain codes, expenses that were being taken out of a different code. So we just reclassified them. And the reason you'll see not a complete offset, it's about $200,000 difference, is because of the significant increase to utilities that we're expecting for next year. And the equipment, you'll notice, has stayed flat. Some of the things that will be purchased is a truck with a plow, a paint shaker, a snow box attachment, a floor scrubber, and an enclosed trailer so that the grounds guys can have their equipment enclosed when they're going to buildings. This next slide represents the utilities costs and the share really of where the expenses are in the utilities. So you'll see electricity obviously is one of the bigger expenses that represents 52%, and gas 27%. So really it's trying to level up to where we should have been, because each year when you're planning the budget, you don't have the last year's utilities costs in. So kind of trying to catch up and also predict what the costs are going to be next year, which is not always easy. So these are all 7 of our buildings that are taken care of. Mr. Estano, along with John Grillo, our architect, they're continually assessing the buildings and the grounds, and they're forming a capital facilities plan. And this helps aid us in efficient and effective long-range planning. And from this, we have focus for our transfer to capital and different projects that need to take place. This is a 5-year roof replacement schedule that the district has been working on replacing the roofs for quite some time. So you'll see for next year, we wanted to feature the Daly, the Weber, and the Manor Haven. These are just sections of the roofs, obviously not the whole entire building, because they have been working on the other parts of the buildings. This will actually complete the actual amount of roofs that needed to be finished. We do have more that are up and coming, but it's a certain bracket kind of. Now the transfer to capital line, we were keeping it flat, the same as what was done last year. Again, we're talking about the Daly, Weber, and Manor Haven roofs. So this will have the remaining roofs that are at or nearing the manufacturer's warranty. They'll all have been replaced. They'll carry an R value of R30 in accordance with the 2020 Building Code of New York State. We would also like to do the high school running track resurfacing. This isn't a complete replacement of it, but what it is, it would include saw cat and removing 12 inches along the inside and outside edge of the existing track, patching and repairing any remaining low spots, installing new rubber surface about a ½ inch thick, and it would have a structural spray over the entire track. And this would help it be more effective. Right now, it's really in poor condition. Also, the John J. Daly exterior masonry reconstruction. This is an extensive exterior masonry repair, and it's required throughout the entire building. Work would include removal of all cracked and broken bricks, tooth-in new brick and mortar, and power wash areas clean upon completion. The priority areas are the north and east elevations, as well as the low roofs. And we've also put in $161,000 for escalation costs, and that really brings the transfer to capital in flat. So with all of the roofing projects that are necessary, it kind of limits your transfer to capital if you're keeping it flat, and doesn't really allow us to do a lot of other things that we've discussed at the Budget and Facilities Committee. So I'm sure when we're done with it, my presentation, we can discuss the transfer to capital a little more. So at our Budget and Facilities meetings, we've discussed quite a few different projects that we really need to have done with the school. One of the ways of doing that is to establish a capital reserve, which we've spoken about at past meetings. So with that, I'm recommending a proposition number 2, in addition to the budget, to create an actual capital reserve that could be used, a maximum amount of $15 million. It would have a term of 10 years, and it would be funded from surplus of prior budgets. So anything that's left over at the end of the year, whether due to not spending the entire budget or receiving additional revenue, that could be put into this reserve or any one of the other 4 reserves that the district utilizes. Not more than $5 million a year would be added to it. This would have no impact to the tax rate, because it's from leftover funds, which every year at the end of the budget, we do allocate to different reserves. So this is really just giving the opportunity to put it into another reserve. And then you would go back out to the voters and request authorization to actually spend that. So some of the projects we're looking at are electrical upgrades in all 7 of the buildings, and also ventilation improvements. The electrical upgrades are necessary because we have a lot of freestanding AC units in those buildings. So it puts a lot of stress on the electrical system that's there. And if down the road we want to eventually do AC, this will be necessary. So it's kind of breaking it all up. Next, we're going to discuss transportation. Transportation represents close to 5% of our overall budget. Port Washington is the 7th largest geographically in Nassau County, with approximately 21 square miles to cover. We have 7 public schools, a preschool program, 34 private and parochial schools, 39 special needs schools and programs. We also do field trip transportation and athletic sports transportation. And this pie chart I've provided kind of shows you the allocation of the transportation expenses. And you can see that most of it is in district, but almost an equal amount goes to private placement. There's about 80 different schools that we transport students to, so it's quite a project. So We transport 528 students to private parochial schools. We transport approximately 135 special needs students and approximately 3,500 students in district. So the district currently contracts with Pierce Transportation for our main contract and for private runs. Then we use Dell Transportation for student, and We Transport for the majority of the private and parochial special needs school runs. The district also owns 5 of its own smaller buses, and this is used primarily for special needs students who have self-contained, also private schools and displaced students. So in the transportation budget, the line items, you'll see there's a large line, the purchase of buses. This $120,000 is for purchasing 2 20-passenger buses. So one of them would be to replace a bus in our fleet that really needs to be replaced. The other one would also be to pick up runs, and it would actually save us money. So the cost of the bus is $60,000. One run could cost us like $80,000, the least, depending on. So eventually, it will save us quite a bit of money. It does take a long time to get buses, so I don't want people to think that it's going to come September 1st, because we need to, once the budget is passed, we need to have time for it to come in. So we're thinking maybe mid-year we could actually get the buses. And then we're also looking to hire a dispatcher to help support the transportation department, and hoping that it will work with communication with it, to the parents. We're also seeking upgrades to the GPS routing system to provide more effective communication as well. You'll also see the transportation line for BOCES has increased significantly. This is really to address current needs at BOCES, but also if we're going to be adding 10 students to BOCES, that's reflected here, because BOCES charges us to transport per student. Next, we're going to look at the security department. In the security budget, we're looking to purchase a new security vehicle. We did have more money in there, but we're going to see if we could get something for $20,000. I'm not sure if we can, but the current vehicle they have is continuously breaking down, and it would just be beneficial to have a new one. You'll see a reclassification in the scholarship visitor management system. So the BOCES code is increasing. It wasn't budgeted there last year. It's just being reclassified. And also, you'll see in the contractual code an increase of $30,000. That's actually due to replacements of the server that's housed at the high school, and this hosts the security system. So this is the beginning of a district-wide replacement cycle of older servers that are used for security. And we will also put upgrades of software to digital watchdog. And that is it.
Thank you, Ms. O'Hara. Okay, so what I'm going to ask the board is, because this is a presentation that is kind of combined our 2 different discussion items that we had tonight, which is one was the actual requests of the athletics, fine arts, facilities, and transportation requests. And then the other part of the conversation that we were going to have is regarding transfer to capital, and then the capital reserve fund, which is up for discussion tonight and actually vote as part of our consent agenda. So if we could structure our questions, first half about the requests, and then we'll come back and have a second conversation about transfer to capital. So if anybody has questions on the first half. Ms. Brooks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. O'Hara. So as we start to go through the budget, and we have to start picking and choosing, right? So things aren't coming to us as a package all tied up. We're going to be able to pull some things, and one from this, one from that. So if you could bear with me, I'm trying to understand, if we go back to the athletics request, the additional 2.5 units for the JV assistant football coach, the football assistant coach. How much is that? Are you able to break out? Because I see the codes and I don't know if it's under contractual, I don't know if it's.
Actually,
Stipends or-
none of the personnel is included in these budgets. So that's actually, the 2.5 would be about $7,000.
That's in
And-
addition to what we see here.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah, and that would be discussed at our
At the
next
next
budget
one.
meeting.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I was going to ask.
But I
this-
just kind of wanted to present it here, so, and also the additional 4.0,
Mhm.
that's about 11,200.
Okay. For the creative arts, oh, I know that, and I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing, I'm grateful for it, but I know that some of the creative arts things that are done in the district curricularly have a grant component to them from the Ed Foundation or, so I'm wondering if any of the requests here are replacements for grant money that we either no longer have, or is this something that the taxpayers have always been paying for and it's just costs are increasing or the program is expanding?
Actually, I believe these are in addition to what we already have. Is that correct? Yes, Kevin. This is, they have increased enrollment. It's increased over 25% over the last 10 years. So this is an opportunity to get instruments, especially the strings instruments, into the hands of students that might not typically go out to play strings because they don't have the ability to purchase it or the financial means.
So the bulk of this is going to be for the growth of the orchestra program.
A lot of it is strings, but there's also, I think there's a timpani drum, there's a baritone saxophone, there's flutes. I'm not sure what a mellophone is, but that's not a string instrument. And a flugelhorn. I don't know what that is.
Mr. Scully,
Yes.
are you coming to answer?
Thank you for saving.
Will
Because
you
I see
play,
there-
will you
there-
play a mellophone
When
for
he
us?
gets done laughing at us, he's going to answer.
Because I see the increase in the field trips, the honor
I could play a
ensembles.
mellophone, yes.
Yeah.
A mellophone is a marching French horn. Flugelhorns are for the jazz band. They're also brass instruments. It is actually more to replace rentals as well as aging instruments. So that's, and address the increase in enrollment. Right now, our HSA and PTAs are helping a lot with rentals when we don't have enough money to pay, and the district is paying $7,000 to $8,000 a year for rentals, and it's growing every year. So it would be quite a good deal to get 60-plus instruments for $19,000 a year that we'll have forever.
And who are the students who use these instruments? Is there a financial
There are
component to it?
some, yeah, there's a financial component for some of the students, but there's also instruments where students aren't able to bring them back and forth, like a upright string bass, so that we have extras at the school so that they don't have to transport those back and forth. We're short on all those. That's why a lot of the larger instruments are on there, as opposed to the smaller instruments.
Mr. Scully, would this mean then that HSAs would not have to fundraise for instruments?
They would need to do less of that. There may, depending on the year, there may be some additional instruments, but yes, they would have to pay for less.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
I just wanted to follow up on that as well. So of the instruments that we're looking at, how many of these, or what percentage of our population, I guess, that's in need is served by this? Do you have a rough estimate?
We don't, there's no students, I guess I'll answer it this way. If a student shows interest in playing an instrument, we find a way for them to play an instrument. And lately it's been a lot through rentals.
Does anybody have any other questions for Mr. Scully since he's right there? Thank you.
Thank you.
May I continue with my questions? Okay, thank you. So I understand that you are not Mr. Restano. I completely understand. So you tell me if I should ask the question another time, or if maybe you can answer it. So one of the things that I've noticed about the buildings where utilities are concerned is that they're hot when they don't need to be hot. The heat is sometimes blasting, and then we have windows open to compensate for the heat. And I always think to myself, if this were my house, I would want to turn my heat down. And I realize it may not be easy to do when you have this big heating system in a school, so I'm just wondering, because electric and gas comprise the majority of the cost, is there a way to address the overheating of the buildings in the winter to try to bring down the costs, or are the systems so finicky that that's something that's not possible?
I can definitely talk to Mr. Asano to get a comprehensive answer. But what I will say is this year, because of COVID, a lot of windows were open, so that causes the heat to keep going. Also, we were discussing, there was actually a fitting that is breaking. It's like a plastic fitting. So they actually are replacing all of these fittings because the steam that goes through the system is so hot that it was having a negative effect. So it was a defect. You did an energy performance contract, I guess, a few years ago. So we're going through that, replacing it with, I believe, brass. So, but we will look into more efficiently. I believe they're controlled like with pneumatic controls, that it'll flip on at certain times. But unfortunately, if the window's open because we're trying to get ventilation, it makes it difficult.
No, I understand that. I was thinking about pre-COVID times when
It
some
was
of the
like that.
classrooms were so hot.
Yeah.
I mean, you could see the steam just pouring in, and I would think to myself, why are
Right.
we overheating classrooms and overheating the
Yeah.
building? So just a thought to pass along. On the roof schedule, which I greatly appreciate, if we could find out how close is there a possibility, I guess there always is, but how close are the priority 2 roofs to becoming priority 1 roofs? I realize this is a long range, more of a long range plan, but I guess because I'm worried about a priority 2 roof suddenly becoming a priority 1 roof, and do we need to consider that in the transfer to capital?
Actually, Mr. Astano, we went over this 5-year plan together, and we talked about it in the budget and facilities, and he's good with this. He's very on top of the roofs, and this is a major priority of his. That's like the mantra, the roofs have to get done, so, and I've only been here 6 months, and I know he's very aware of it.
Okay. Can I keep going? I have a couple more.
Just real quick, I just want to clarify, the architect, John Grillo, he worked with Jim as far as developing the priority list, so I just want to make sure that it's not just Jim, it's the architect who feels comfortable with the priority list.
Yes, that's correct. And so there's a 5-year capital plan that was done, I guess, back in 2015 maybe. That's up at the state. So most of the things that were on that have been completed. There's a few things still on it, but what will happen is the new 5-year plan that was worked on with Mr. Grillo will be merged with the other one, and in a year and a half, we'll have to submit that up to the state as well. So that's kind of a fluid document. That's just, they're continually each year, like you're saying, is it now a priority 1? He's making sure that everything is going along as we planned, and if something becomes like the track, that used to be a little further down, and you had, I think, middle school windows was a higher priority. Now the track and the masonry work at Daly has more priority.
Okay, so speaking of the track,
Deb, we're holding off on transfer to capital questions till after. So do you have any other, do you have a transportation question? Because that's the next section.
I will tell you, I do. So one of my questions when we purchase another school bus, then we also have to purchase somebody to drive that school bus, and we have to maintain the school bus, and we have to put gasoline in the school bus. Will we still come out ahead by purchasing that extra school bus than by going through the contractual?
Yes,
route?
yes, definitely. We're hiring a dispatcher, so the dispatcher will be somebody who also has a driving license for a bus. So he'll serve as a sub, because with 5 drivers and 5 buses, if somebody is sick, then you can't pick up some students. And also, if one of your buses needs to be repaired, if you don't have an extra bus, you can't, now you have a run that you can't meet. And often we'll have runs that pop up in the middle of the year. So it will definitely save us. There's some runs that cost $125,000 a year. And this cost for the bus, if you did over 5 years, $60,000, and the cost of a dispatcher, it will definitely save us money.
Okay. And I think I have one more question. I know that once we set a parameter in terms of distance that we will provide a bus to a student living within a certain distance, many times I see empty school buses, not empty school buses, but school buses that aren't filled. So is there a way to try to, I don't know if the word is economize, or just because the student lives within the transportation boundary doesn't mean they're going to use the bus, but I understand that we need to provide a seat for them even if they never use the bus, which sometimes means that there are students who have a seat who never use the bus. Am I making
Yes,
sense?
I understand what you're saying.
So is there a way for us to, I don't know, get around that, or try to do some type of a study that would try to save money on the
Sure.
overutilization of buses by children who live within the bus zone but who aren't taking the buses?
I think I understand what your
Okay,
question
thank
is.
you.
It's a very good question. What we had happen this year, when we planned the routes, we had so many kids, I think it was at Guggenheim, on bus 23, on a few different buses. And then you'd see other buses where there were hardly any students. So what happens is our Director of Transportation, Robin, she'll look at that and the participation on the buses, and then she did rerouted the buses to have ones that were too full being picked up by other ones. So it takes like a month or so to see what students are actually utilizing it, because initially we do have to make sure everyone has a seat on the bus. But if we know parents aren't going to be sending it,
Can I just interrupt for that? Isn't there a process, or wouldn't we have to put it to vote if we change the boundaries? So right now, I think we have it set that if you live a half a mile, I believe, is it a half a mile from an elementary school and a mile from the high school? And I don't know if I'm correct about that, I might be wrong. But we have certain boundaries. If we wanted to eliminate, I guess, some of the buses, or to Deborah's point of maybe not having as crowded buses, wouldn't we have to go to vote to the public to ask if they would approve making it from a half a mile, for instance, to 3/4 of a mile? Again, I'm
no,
making that
so
up.
there's a regulation from the state that you can't make it less. You can't make it further. So if you have to pick my child up, if we live a half a mile, you can't say 2 miles, because that's not fair. But if you want to provide it to everybody, like door-to-door service, that's when you would have to go out to the voters, because that's providing more than what is required of you, and it would be an expense.
Okay, good. So we could not change the boundaries, but we could, what you are saying is look at the buses after they've gone out after the first month, and then reroute by condensing runs.
Yeah.
That's the way to be more efficient about it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Deborah,
just
were you
yeah, I
done?
wasn't suggesting
No, I
changing-
know.
yeah, okay,
I was just trying to get,
just trying to be
that
efficient.
question has been asked in the past, and I wanted to make sure we understood. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions regarding these topics that Deborah did not cover? She covered them all. Rachel, no? Go ahead.
On the busing issue, I appreciate you coming up with this. I think it shows how sort of out of left field, you can always have these ideas that save money, that obviously wasn't on the radar for any of us until you got here. In terms of the savings that bus creates, is this a situation where 2 buses saves even more, 3 buses saves even more? You know, is it the beginning of thinking about a fleet, or is it really just this one extra bus saves money and expanding from there isn't a good idea?
So I have thought about getting a fleet of buses, but, and actually looking at electric buses and to see if there was something with the town that you could do or with Nassau County. But the problem is, where would you house all of these buses? You would have to build a bus garage and things like that. So right now, it's just the 2 buses. I don't know if down the road something, but that has impacts on the people who live here. Do they want a bus yard and things like that? So I don't know that that's something that the community really wants right now, so.
Thank you. I have one tiny comment. It's not really a question. Just, I want to thank you and Jim and everybody involved in this on the roofs, because I want to highlight for a minute how organized and certain and forward-thinking and planning for the future this whole roof situation is. Because when we first started talking about roofs a couple of years ago, it was because we had roofs breaking down, and that's when I think most of us found out on the board that roof doesn't mean the top of the building, because apparently every building can have many, many, many roofs, and that we had many of them breaking down. So to see it just simply on one page, and that by the end of next year, we'll be done with the majority of our buildings, more than half of our buildings, is amazing. And I really appreciate all the forward planning and the clear financial thinking on the part of the administration to get us to this point, because I think this is our goal. Are you dinging me off? This is our goal with facilities in general, is to get to the point where we're doing solid financial and facilities planning going forward. So things aren't emergencies, things aren't breaking down. We're just making sure everything is in the condition it needs to be in.
Sorry, I had to test my button too. Ms. Melconian, did you have any questions on this part of the conversation? No. Okay. Dr. Block. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped over Ms. Epstein again. I do it all the time. So sorry.
I hopefully will be quick. Ms. O'Hara, you mentioned an energy performance contract. So I don't know what the term of our contract is or where we are in that relationship, but in light of all of these increases in utility costs, et cetera, is it beneficial for us to re-examine or enhance in any way, shape, or form our relationship with an energy performance contract, because maybe they will have some cost-saving measures that will help us moving forward?
Sure. Actually, I believe our architect, John Grillo, could work with our attorneys to do our own energy performance contract. Because I know that's an area, it's good to work with an architect and an engineer, because they understand the district's buildings and what we have here. Sometimes when you go with an energy performance contract, they don't always have actual physical engineers, so they might be designing something that would save money, but for a different building, so I can definitely look into that and start just giving you ideas of things that could be improved.
Perfect. And I know there are also other financial aspects to it also, as far as how the financial manipulations go in regards to those as well. So that would be great if we could look at that moving forward.
Yeah.
In regards to the school buses, what is the actual life of a school bus? And I'm asking in terms of forward planning, because I know the executive budget of the governor is such that we're supposed to be moving towards electric, which I know we can't purchase now. But again, I'm just curious what the long-term plan is here.
I believe they're about 15 years, but I'd have to check on that. I know they last a while. So, yeah, I know that I think it was by 2025 where she would like us to have electric buses, but unless the infrastructure with Nassau County is there, there's no way that schools, because I know we've talked about it. I've reached out to colleagues from surrounding districts to see if they would want to do something together. And it's really getting the electric, like where would you have it? Where would you hook things up to? And so it's something that has to be well thought out, which is not going to be by 25.
No, I think this is great because it actually gives us the perfect amount of time because it's 2027 to 2035 that we have to implement that plan. So it's right there on that 15 mark. So thank you. Those are my two questions.
I actually skipped over myself. So I have a question regarding, again, transportation. So in the codes that you have for transportation, on the contract transportation, you have an increase of a dollar change of $370,000. Is that based on, and you write that we're going to be contracting with Pierce and Dell and First Student and We Transport. So do we already know that we have this increase in place for next year? We've received that, or are you guesstimating?
This is an estimate, so we're assuming an increase in CPI of 4.3%, because that's what was used, like, for the tax cap. But this is also, there's additional runs for special needs students, based on the changing demographics. We have some that might not have needed services, now need services. We've also added runs for displaced or homeless students, so that's also in here. So that's why this increase shows like 5.2, which is higher than 4.3.
Got it, thank you. That was my only question. Dr. Block.
All right, I have a couple of questions, so buckle up. So first, the Project Adventure equipment. So I love Project Adventure and all that stuff. Do we have a sense of how frequently it's used by I assume the high school students? I've never heard of it being used.
Do we want, Mr. Schrottweiser,
Yes.
do you want to answer that question? I think your mic is on.
They have a significant unit that they use at Schreiber in outdoor ed class that lasts close to a little more than 6 weeks. And they use it almost every single day. They'll then use the ropes course outside later on in the spring. So there's two separate units. There's an indoor one in the back gym, the new gym, and then there's an outdoor one that they do later on in the year. The climbing apparatuses at Weber have not been used over the last few years. We're looking to use them next fall.
Okay, I have a follow-up on it. Do you need any special certification to
Yeah.
oversee the students?
Yeah, we send our teachers for certification. We also get the courses recertified every year. We have someone that comes in over the summer and looks at all the pieces that we have.
Okay. Because I'm wondering, I mean, it seems like It seems like there might be an opportunity to leverage the use of this on weekends for birthday parties and things like that. And I was wondering if we had ever thought about this question, I guess, for Mrs. O'Hara, like, have we thought about opportunities to bring in revenue from this? Because I'm gathering it's not used on weekends.
So I did bring that up. Nick and I spoke about it. Where it comes into difficulty is you do have to be trained on the apparatus. So we would have to have somebody oversee the students doing it. And I'm not really sure of the legal aspects, if like insurance-wise. And Nick, what are your opinion on that?
I think it would just be about who's running that operation on the weekends and renting out for like a birthday party. I don't know if schools, districts have done before renting facilities for birthday parties as far as, I would just think about supervision and liability.
Okay. That's something I'd like to continue to think about. And for the record, my kids' birthday parties were at the school district, regardless of whether they had, explicit permission. So, like, it happens. Yeah,
And
I
now
was
we
on the
all
record.
know. And now it's on the record.
Oh my God, I'm on the record? Okay, the next
Don't
question.
admit to crimes in public. That's my legal advice.
The next question is related to the gas and electricity. So a lot of things have been happening in the world very recently, and so I guess my question is, when were the last updates to what the estimated price increases are going to be for next year? Because, like, if gas goes to $20, right, we're on the hook for it.
So you are going to see a budget transfer probably at the next budget, next board meeting for gas, increases to gas, because like I kind of alluded to before, when we're planning the budget, you might only have gas expenditures for up to January now, but we're forming the budget. So in prior years, the budget you have now was not based on a very good number. We have to increase it, I think, $280,000. So it is difficult. Like we're trying to get this line to where it needs to be, but even it needs more probably. Like I do have a cushion in there, but it's not
Okay, yeah,
significant.
so I tend to, that was where my question was going, which is that I agree, and I think that we should look to other organizations for what they are planning for a year in advance for what fuel prices are gonna be, because what it was, a couple of weeks ago is very different than where we think it's gonna be right now.
Right, agreed.
And then I think my last question is related to, how do we estimate the number of, there's a whole bunch of students that are eligible for the bus that don't use it. How do we estimate what that is going to be and plan for that on a year-to-year basis?
I would have to get back to you on the exact way that it's done, but I believe it's based off of prior years, what the participation rate is. So she'll look at that, but also after the runs are being done for like a week or so, what we would like to do, and that's why we need the dispatcher, so that our director can actually go to the schools and see that the buses, like this one has too many kids, this one doesn't have a lot. Because she was always, the beginning of the school year, she was answering the phone, she was doing everything, and not out at the building supporting the parents and the students. So that's when she would look at it and say, hey, you know what, I need to tweak this route.
Great. Thank you, Ms. O'Hara.
Mr. Smith?
Since everyone already asked most of the questions, I'm just going to kind of reiterate what Dr. Block was asking about, is just kind of like across the budget in general. Are you looking at like the current state of inflation in everything, and even expecting that like oil has another $50, $80 a barrel to go up? Like I think you might not even be scratching the surface on what the heating costs could be next year. And I'm just wondering like what happens if that happens.
So we use gas, first of all, to heat our buildings, which is, I think, very good for us. You'll see there's a line in there of $25,000 for fuel oil. I think that's just for, it needs to go through the systems to make sure that it's working, like to keep it. We do have a 4% fund balance if things were like to skyrocket through and we needed to use that. That's always an option, and that's why we do have reserves for other reasons. And I do have contingencies built into the budget. So that's, and when we discuss the different budget scenarios hopefully at an extra meeting, we'll discuss that, like how much contingency do you want in the budget and where should we be going? So they're all very difficult questions because you don't know what the future holds, but we need to plan for the future too.
Okay, so, do you want to say something?
Just one point I want to make, piggybacking on what Adam just said, Mr. Smith, because in many years, we hit a point in the budget where we decide to take some money out of reserves to stay below the tax cap. And so I just want to highlight for all of us that this might be a year where we want to be very careful with keeping our reserves intact because we may need that cushion in a different way. So I think this is a conversation for another day, but Mr. Smith making his point made me think about this.
Yeah, I think it's a really good thing to pay attention to because just like, I know they say inflation is 4.5%. It's not. It's much higher. You can see it in your food bills and your gas bills, and I just can't imagine that that's not going to hit us here as well. I know we have a lot of things we're planning for that we may all just get eaten up in cost escalations of things that we already have that we just want to maintain.
Also, what some school districts do too, and it's always an option, if you see that the expense is going to be so high, you cut spending. Just because we budget for something doesn't mean we have to purchase all of it. So we could say, hey, you know what? we can't purchase all of those buses, or we can't purchase things that we really wanted, but it's still there. You can transfer the money into a different line, but we know that there's a limited amount.
Dr. Hines, you wanted to say something?
I do. Just a point of clarification, under transportation requests, you talk about upgrades to the GPS routing system. Is that the bus app that we were talking about, or is that something totally different?
No, this is something different. This is, the GPS they currently have are kind of just pictures. This is an actual digital GPS upgrade. So when they went out to bid for the buses, that was in the bid that they have GPS, so we could tell where the buses are. But no, the app is a different cost, but I believe we've been working with a different website design that can actually, push that out. So that money is actually in this budget. I think it's like $4,000. So that would be a cost savings if we go with the program that Shannon's been looking at.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so what, we can now just move on to the transfer to capital discussion and the capital reserve discussion. Because we have the capital reserve proposition number 2 on our consent agenda, and we've spent a couple of meetings discussing it, and we did spend some time at the Budget and Facilities Committee discussing it. Does anybody on the board have any questions, or they need further clarification so that they can vote properly later, or can we move on to just transfer to capital? So do you, Mr. Smith, I'm assuming you don't. Dr. Block? Anybody else have any questions? Ms. Brooks?
Our electrical,
And it was about the capital reserve, right?
yes,
Okay.
yes. Are electrical upgrades necessary if we don't, oh my gosh, I can't read my writing without my glasses, sorry. If we don't pursue the air conditioning?
Yes, they definitely are, because what's happening now is you have window units that are in individual classrooms, and those are putting a strain on the electrical systems at the schools, so it's very necessary.
So whether we upgrade the air conditioning or not, we still need to deal with the electrical system.
That's correct.
Also, if we remember, when we did the facilities tours, we were told that the Chromebooks that now every student has in the building has put a strain on the electrical system, because students are coming in and they need to plug in their Chromebooks, which in the past we didn't have, and there are times that they don't have outlets in the actual classroom. So that was part of that facilities discussion that they talked about that.
But weren't the kids told they need to come into school with their Chromebooks charged?
That's the point. It's because they can't charge them in school. So,
I see. Okay, so if anyone doesn't have any other questions, Rachel, did you have a question about the capital reserve fund? Okay, great. So I'm going to move on to the transfer to capital. Are there questions regarding transfer to capital? Actually, I'm going to start. I'm not going to let you all ask questions. So the transfer to capital that you have listed for this evening, which is leaving a flat transfer to capital from last year, has the projects that you listed that we just went over. The question that I have for you, Ms. O'Hara, is, because history-wise, we have been inching it up a little bit further every year. What would happen if we did transfer to capital of 2.1 million, for instance, and then 2.2? Can you explain for all of us how that affects the tax levy limit and just the whole basis of the explanation of what transfer to capital really means?
So with the tax cap levy, there's certain exclusions that apply. So you have debt service that's excluded from the tax cap. You also have capital expenditures that are excluded from the tax cap. So if you were to increase the transfer to capital line, you would be increasing that exclusion. So what it would do is increase the allowable tax levy. So if you're currently at 2.583 and you increased it 100,000, it would go up to 2.65, would be the new allowable tax levy limit. So you could actually levy taxes up to that amount and only require a simple majority vote.
Does that affect the gap, the budget-to-budget gap? If we go, if we put 100,000 in,
Yes.
if we
You'll-
go up
You
100,000?
will increase your budget to budget.
By
but-
100,000, right?
Right.
For every 100,000 that you put in the transfer to capital, you're increasing your budget to budget?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah,
Wait, can you, I'm not following
sure.
what she's asking.
So if you have it, your budget to budget is 4.5%, and now you add 100,000, you might be at 4.56%. Your budget has increased, but the voters are actually voting on the tax cap. Like, they're voting on your budget, yeah, but also staying under the tax cap.
Is there a benefit in your mind for us as a board to consider going above, increasing to 100,000? Let's say going to 2.123, whatever it is this year, an extra 100,000, which would make our allowable levy at 2.65. Is there a benefit, do you believe, or what would be your, I know you've been working on the premise that we're not increasing our transfer to capital from what we did last year. In your estimation, is there a benefit to do that?
I believe there is because of the escalation cost with the roofing projects. Currently at the high school, they don't have the supplies to finish the roof, so we have a temporary roof on there. So I know that the cost for the roofing and the products, the materials has all increased. So this 161,000 that I have in there is really only about an 8% escalation cost. So if we could increase it a little bit, I think it would cover that. And we have a whole, probably 8 pages of capital improvements that I could fill up any transfer to capital with. So it's really the comfort level of.
What is the difference for the average taxpayer if we did this? Like the 2.58, do you have a bit, I don't know if you have that off the top of your
I
head.
did look at that. It's a difference of about $13 a year increase to their taxes for the average home.
So going from 2.58 to 2.65 would increase it $13. And when you say average, what's the number you're using for the average home? Like what's the average household, the price?
I believe it's $750,000.
750, okay, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? Ms. Epstein?
So then, what's the recommendation you have as far as increasing the transfer to capital to give you that cushion that is needed? Is it just the additional 100,000, or are you suggesting something more?
I think the 100,000 would be sufficient.
So you're just thinking $2,123,088?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Brooks?
Thank you. On the track resurfacing, do we know how long that will last?
I believe it's about another 10 years.
Okay. And I listened to the budget meetings, and I know there's been discussion about the tennis courts for several years, but those have been pushed down as a priority. And I remember when we walked around, one of the tennis coaches was telling us some of the issues with the tennis courts, including draining and cracks and things like that. Is there no way to get those done this year?
They would require a significant amount of money. I think the entire thing,
Was it 400,000? I'm trying to.
or 600 is for, yeah. So
That's what it was the last
unfortunately,
time. I don't know what
yeah.
it's maybe today with cost, but.
yeah, with the escalation.
So the issue was because we didn't have the money to do it, as opposed to the fact that it wasn't our priority?
Right.
It was a lower priority, I heard.
Can I speak to that for a second, do you mind? All right.
Are you speaking as a tennis
No,
advocate
I am-
or?
Yes and no. I'm trying to put the practical hat on.
Look at that.
I see Nick. I feel Nick right now. The reality is, I don't think it can be this year, and I think it has to be done the right way. But we have the French Open, the US Open, we have Wimbledon on those courts. They are all different surfaces. And at some point very soon, it has to be addressed. But with all these other things that are taking place, and it pains me to say this, and I'm not looking at Nick right now, I wouldn't recommend that we do it this year, but we have to, I believe, within the next 2 years. It has to be a priority, and I think it has to be a well-thought-out plan to be done the right way, because all we're doing is sealing the cracks and kicking that can down the road. And I'm saying this as a tennis player. Next year, I think, is when we should address it.
Well, I just also, to Deborah's point, when we did the facilities tour, we did hear a lot about the tennis courts, and we did hear how, we actually walked on and there was a tennis team playing, and we heard from the coaches who had a lot of great ideas about reusing maybe restructuring the way it was done. We heard about lighting being added, that we don't have lighting, and sometimes when they go play their games, they have parents put on their cars, headlights, and so I think, to your point, if we are looking, and if we are, the tennis courts being something that is not only used just by our students, but it's also used by our community, I think we would be doing our due diligence to actually create a plan, include the lighting, not just the resurfacing, but actually really revamp them, and maybe that can be added as a facilities discussion as we go forward. Ms. Brooks, did you have more questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, I'm sorry, I forgot, sorry, go ahead.
Just on this transfer to capital issue, I think what I heard you say is, with everything else, this is like the wish list. With transfer to capital, these are the must-haves. This is not negotiable. We have to do these. And I also heard you say that there's so much on this must-have list that things that are really want-to-haves, close to maybe almost very badly needs, are falling off of the list as a result. We do have some other conversations in front of us. Maybe we should have a conversation about what those items are that are just below, in the 100, in the 200,000, in the $250,000 range, as we're still in these planning stages where we're playing with what this number is going to be on the tax levy. And maybe we can kick that question to Mr. Smith and Ms. O'Hara to discuss in budget at some point.
We do actually have a list, and we've prioritized it. It's just, you don't have the funds to do it, and that's why we're coming up with the capital reserve, because that will give you the means to address these issues that are so important.
I know, money is always tight here, right? But if we actually put other things into this transfer to capital line, we would be talking about adding it to the tax levy, right? And so then it's a balancing that maybe we need to do about where we think the levy can reasonably come in at. But I'm just suggesting that maybe we could all use a little more information about what would be in it if this number creeps higher, and how important that stuff actually is, because I think in general, this board doesn't want it to be that the district is going without things that are very important at the expense of keeping the levy just like, $1 lower for every family.
I think that was the question. I think what Ms. O'Hara did say is that the list that we've been given is the priority list, and that, correct? I don't think that there's anything, and if you remember, everybody, we received the facilities report, correct?
But I think that there's a list that's quite long. Like, we have multiple more years of roofs that are priority 1 and 2. We have a $67 million capital plan to do like all the items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so there's plenty more things. This list was designed to plug $2 million, which was what previous boards had assigned to transfer capital in the past. Sorry, last year's board had assigned to this. So I think what Rachel is saying is she just wants us to discuss if we're sticking a round peg in a square hole, and maybe we can like widen the hole a little bit. And I don't know if that's a conversation for now or not, but we seem to be kicking a lot of conversations down the.
So I'm not kicking it,
yeah.
because I wanted to ask Ms. O'Hara, when do you need to know from the board, because you are building this budget, by when do you need to know from us what we are committing to as far as transfer to capital?
Tonight, I would like that. So, no, actually, the next two things that are a priority on this list, these are all ones. The next two things are 1.5s, and those are daily roof replacement and high school roof replacement. So those are very large. Those are each 1.9 and 4.9. So on that 5-year schedule, that's what we're going to address in the next one. So it's really too significant to put onto this transfer to capital. So that's why I think increasing it 100,000 will hopefully cover the escalation cost. And if the costs aren't that high, then maybe we could do a couple of smaller projects with that 100,000 or 50,000.
Ms. Epstein?
So I just want to clarify, because it's not like transfer to capital is a piggy bank of ever-ending money, right? It does have a limit, and it does still have to be funded by something. So that's why in the recommendation of what we're dealing with this current budget and our budget-to-budget increase, you are saying that really the ultimate ceiling for us is going no further than 2.123 million, right? And that's it. Even though we can increase our allowable levy limit and we can do different things, do we have the necessary funding to then do this and fill in those gaps that we still need to fill in for our budget-to-budget increase? Am I hearing that correctly? Otherwise, we could go to 2.5, but what are the repercussions of going to 2.5 million then?
Okay, Ms. Gilliard is shaking her head. I'm going to let Ms. Gilliard speak.
I mean, look, we had this conversation several years ago in the Budget Committee, and so you'll tell me if I'm wrong, Ms. O'Hara, but my understanding is the sky's the limit with the transfer to capital line, right? We could decide we're going to do all of this. We're going to add another $10 million to the transfer to capital line. The tax levy is going to be 9.3% this year. And we could do that, right? I mean, the taxpayers are going to vote it down, so it's a dumb plan, and we should definitely not do that, and I'm not endorsing it. But we could do that, right? It's the balance for us is how much do we think is the appropriate financially responsible amount to put in this line based on what the district's needs are and based on what is a responsible levy to put on the community. And it does go into the gap, but not really the same way. No, it does, but it doesn't have the same impact as because transfer to capital doesn't go under the tax. It's excluded, right? It doesn't go into the cap, so it doesn't have the same issues for us.
Okay, Ms. O'Hara, so as I asked you earlier, if we increase transfer to capital by, right now, let's say by $100,000, our budget has gone up by $100,000. Therefore, we have an extra $100,000 gap from last year's budget. Am I wrong or correct?
No, you're correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So if we increase the transfer to capital to $9 million, we've increased our entire budget by $9 million. We need to find the difference to be able to get to stay within that cap, to stay at that number. No, we've pierced the cap, though. We're not underneath the limit. They're all, okay.
I'm getting confused.
The transfer to capital line is not under the tax cap. It's the tax levy limit, but the tax levy limit is calculated. It's a separate issue from the cap. We have to be under the cap, but that's how you can have. We've had years where our tax levy is 3.9, but our cap is 2.9, and this is how this happens.
What's the question? No, I'm not sure. No, so when you add to the capital line, you're increasing your exclusion. You're still increasing your budget. The taxpayers are still going to have to fund that because you're levying taxes for that. Although it's permissible, you don't need a supermajority to pass it. You need a simple majority. So that's the difference, but you're still increasing taxes. And it's in your control to not do that or to do it.
No, what I'm confused about, and I'm gonna go back to the clarifying question I asked earlier, is Emily keeps asking if it increases our gap, and you're saying yes, and that's not tying with what Rachel is saying. That's where I'm confused.
So maybe we need to clarify what the gap is.
The gap is the shortfall to fund the operating budget after we figure out.
I'm seeing the gap as how much more is it than last year?
That's
I
not what
believe
you're-
that's the gap.
I thought you were talking about the gap is what we need to fill to close. Last year, the gap, when you guys were using the term gap, was how much is our expenses more than our revenue? Yes,
Gap is always,
yeah,
always, last year's budget to this year's budget. When you take the budget, when you take this year's budget and you just
Yeah.
roll everything over, right? It's a budget to budget increase,
Right.
whether, it's salaries, it's contracts, it's program, whatever, the rollover. What is the increase? That's what we always start off with as what we call the gap.
right.
Right? And by the way, just for everybody, this is great that we're having this conversation because this is a new process for a lot of us, so it's good that we are asking these questions. So that's what the gap is. So if we're increasing the tax levy, whatever it's allowable by transfer to capital, we're within the tax cap, but this money has to come from somewhere. And it's coming from the pocket of our taxpayers, unless what we've done in the past
Yeah.
is gone into reserves, as you remember, Ms. Gilliard, right? We've gone sometimes in the past into our reserves, and we've said, hold on, we're gonna do a $2 million transfer, but we're not going to give the entire burden to the taxpayers. We're going into our reserves, and we're going to take $500,000, $800,000, whatever that conversation has been.
Okay,
Do you
yeah.
understand?
I understand completely, but we're saying different things. The point is, there's the budget that has to, of non-excluded items, that has to fall under the tax cap. If our operating budget becomes too high, we're gonna have to close a gap to get under the tax cap. Stop. Forget that. We're gonna close the gap to get under the operating budget. When Mary Callahan last year was talking about the $900,000 gap, it was to get the operating budget under the tax cap. Totally unrelated conversation now is the total tax levy, which can be raised above the tax cap by certain items, including transfer to capital. That will be funded, if approved, by additional revenues that are going to be borne by the taxpayers. That's what we're talking about now, because we would, if we raised the 2 million to 2.4, we would find $400,000. Basically, would be found by the taxpayers kicking in another $400,000 if they vote to approve it. Everybody understands this. We're just arguing about words, I think, unnecessarily. Are we all in agreement with what I just explained? We're all good? Okay. So back to what Rachel was saying.
Ms. O'Hara, do you agree? Well, we understand what we think we understand.
I think that's correct, what I said. Is that?
Ms. Brooks, do you have a question? Oh, Nanette, I'm sorry.
I think I'm even afraid to say all of this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think the distinction is about whether or not we wind up needing a supermajority in another line item, as opposed to, because we do it this way, we're still staying within the legal tax cap limit. So we only need the majority versus the supermajority.
That's correct. So if you actually added 100,000 to a salary code or a contractual code, now you might need a supermajority because that's not excluded. A
I did
capital-
it, see? I did it.
Good job.
Ms. Brooks, did you have a question?
Not one that I need to ask now.
So I'm going, do you have a question?
It's just an additional comment, I'm sorry. So I think, having lived through the last 2 years that we lived through, where we had all of these expenses come in and basically eat our money for programs, for other things. I don't want to be in that position again. And so my question is whether or not we should be considering funding the transfer to capital line with a little more of a cushion there, because the worst case scenario is that we get to do another project sooner out of that, or I don't know what the worst case scenario is. I guess the worst case scenario is the costs do go up that much and we need to spend it all, and the best case scenario is we get to do a project a year sooner than we would have done it.
So Ms. O'Hara, if we increase the transfer to capital by 200,000, so adding 100,000 to your current number gives us a 2.65 tax levy limit, what would 200,000 make it? Do you have that number?
I do have it in one of my papers, but honestly, I wouldn't recommend that because I think the 100,000 will cover the escalation costs. And if you had to do a project, it's going to be more than 100,000. It's going to be like 2 million that you would need. So in that case, you would go into your fund balance, your undesignated 4%. So I don't think in these economic times that it's wise to go out with too high of a budget to budget, I just don't think that's something we want to ask the taxpayers to do, but just my opinion.
Okay, so I'm going to get a sense of the board because I'm hearing a recommendation from our administrators. And I guess, Dr. Hines, do you agree with that?
I do. I think 2.1, right, as you're talking about, Ms. O'Hara, I think that's more than adequate.
So I'm going to get a sense of the board. Does anybody, we are being asked to approve, or the recommendation that Ms. O'Hara is making, that we go to a tax levy limit of a 2.65, which would give us transfer to capital of $2,123,100. I mean, can we round it up to one? Just
Emily,
yes.
I was going to say, before you ask for a sense of the board, I'm totally uncomfortable giving my sense of this with what we know about the budget right now. I'm like way not even ready to have this conversation. We've seen we've only done 3 or 4 budget workshops. We don't know where the gap is. So Ms. O'Hara, do you think that now is the time, or should we do this, should we get this sense in 1 or 2 more meetings when we see where it all comes together?
I think we would need it before the April 12th for sure.
I know, but it's.
Which is why I think Ms. O'Hara also asked for an extra meeting, because what we've been doing so far, which I think we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
This is different than what we've done in the past. In the past, we've had presentations that basically started off with, here's the gap, here's what I need to cut, and what
Right.
we've been hearing so far this year different is what our budget actually looks like, other than
I
just a
understand,
bunch of
but
numbers.
it's not
Hold on a
finished.
second. So what I think what the process is that after we do our next meeting on March 22nd, which we'll be discussing personnel and whatnot, I think the request to have another meeting added before April 12th would be the actual final presentation that would put everything together. So what we've been seeing so far in all our meetings are requests.
Right.
They are not necessarily what the administration is recommending. It's
Right.
not, right? So that's why I asked earlier, Ms. O'Hara, when do you need to know from us what the transfer to capital number is, so that you can actually, I think she might need that to be able to make the recommendation of what the budget is going to look like and what we are putting in as programming, what we are cutting in programming.
But we're talking about $100,000 differential, so I don't see how, and that's not coming
So
out of the
does-
budget, so that doesn't make any sense.
So does that make a difference to you? I guess, well, right now, we don't know. Is it 100,
Well,
is it 200,000?
But that's not part of the tax levy limit calculation.
It is.
No, we just explained it isn't.
No,
It changes the tax
it is.
levy.
No,
It
sorry, the
is.
tax cap.
That is the cap.
No, the tax cap is not part of transfer. Transfer
Oh.
capital does not, we
Yes,
just
no,
went through
the
this.
transfer to capital definitely influences the tax cap.
I thought we
so-
said it doesn't.
No, it does. It's just you don't have to have a supermajority
Right,
vote.
right, that's what the tax cap is,
It's
yeah.
increasing your tax cap.
Your
though.
tax-
Yes.
Supermajority
It's
means
increasing your tax
piercing
levy.
the cap.
The
Not your-
limits,
It's, yeah,
You're
it's raising
increasing
your
the
tax
limit.
levy of,
limits,
correct.
the whole limit, yeah.
Yeah.
So to answer your question,
Yeah.
I do think it's good to have it now, because the reason I'm recommending the 100,000 is because I really think it's necessary. And I don't think any budget scenario that we present, you'd either have to cut some of the transfer to capital, not just that 100,000. You might have to take out one of the other projects. So I think it is okay. I also have to submit to the state the property tax report, like what our limit is, which I've already done March 1st, but I can go in and revise it. So if you were to approve it now, I could actually go into the state ed website and update it. So, but I can change that also if you're not comfortable, but
It's not that I'm not comfortable, I just feel like we don't have enough information to be comfortable with a number right now, because we don't know what we're giving up. Like, let's say we decide we want the total budget to stay under a certain percentage, 2 point, whatever it is, and you tell us.
2.58 right now.
Okay, so it's
right?
2.58, okay? And then you tell us, but in order to keep it under 2.58, we're gonna have to cut X, Y, and Z. And then we might say, you know what, we really want X, Y, and Z, so we can't put that extra 200, or maybe we can only give you 1.8 in, don't shake your head, it's yes, I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong, Emily. I'm
But
not
here's
wrong.
the thing is your
Yeah.
budget to budget can be higher than 2.58 because you've gotten state aid. So
Right.
you
But
could
I'm
actually
saying,
have
that's
a
what I'm saying,
budget.
it all has to come together, and we don't have that whole picture. So I feel like we're doing this in pieces,
Mhm.
and we don't have the whole picture yet. That's what I'm saying.
When's the next budget meeting?
March 22nd.
Yeah.
March 20, so if we,
We can do another one sooner.
I guess, okay, so Dr. Block, are you in agreement with Mr. Smith that you don't have enough info?
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable with it. I want to know what the commitment is. Is it just a placeholder or the transfer to capital?
In terms of a placeholder, what do
Me-
you mean?
Meaning that we agreed to 2.1 million now, you use it in your numbers going forward, but if on April 5th, when we discuss and we have a big gap, we can say, you know what, let's make it 2.3 million?
Yes, you could definitely change it.
Okay,
You could decrease it also if you saw fit.
sure.
But the other thing we also need to remember is that the state runs don't come out till at least April 1st, right? At the April 1st, the earliest. So we really won't, we're talking about very tight time frame.
No, I understand that. So what I'm saying is like, if we're just putting a placeholder, I'm just confused what we're getting this. I just don't want to be locked into committing to something if you're taking the sense of the board today. And I think we all conceptually are going to agree to that it's either 2 million plus or minus. But are we ready to come up with that like plus or minus 100, 200 either way right now, and do we have to? And we haven't had conversations about like board priorities at all. We've had no, like what Jay Rorota called vigorous board conversations about priorities, right? We haven't had any of those. We haven't talked about playgrounds, for example, if that's something that is this year or next year. We know a bunch of board members piped in about it we haven't had any board conversations about board priorities. We're just looking at PowerPoints and saying, okay, yes or no. And we haven't even said yes or no. The first vote we're having in all of this is on transfer to capital.
Right,
That's all I'm
because
saying.
I agree, I understand what you're saying, but I think that's one of the things that is needed so that we can get that conversation that you want about what's in the budget.
So I'm fine with it, but then I guess which meeting will that conversation be at?
Ultimately, that's on April 5th. I think that's what Ms. O'Hara was requesting, is to have a meeting. You also have your budget and facilities meetings that you can be having these conversations in.
Okay, then, okay. We'll talk about that later.
No, we're not. Ms. Gilliar, do you have, I'm trying to get a sense. So wait, I'm going back to you two. Are you okay with keeping 2.1, whatever number I said, as a placeholder for now? And then we can always, nothing, by the way, is done until we vote to adopt the budget on April 12th. So things can change either way. We may find out on April 1st, God willing, that we get $10 million extra in state aid. Then everything changes. So nothing is done until we actually vote on adopting the budget. These are our placeholders. Are you okay with that placeholder, Dr. Block?
You're going to love my answer. I want to hear what the rest of the board
Oh,
thinks. Before I weigh in, because I feel like I don't have enough information. I don't know if 2.1 million is enough. I shared a scenario where like fuel costs are, threefold higher, and, this seems like, they seem like they would impact each other.
I'm okay with it.
Mr. Smith?
I'm conceptually okay with the ballpark as long as it's noted that we can reopen the conversation and everyone remembers that part of it.
I'll forget it. I'm okay with the recommendation as well. Ms. Gilliar?
I have to say, I find it a little weird that we're doing a sense of the board on something that can be changed. So.
Right? A sense is a sense, not
I
a
mean,
vote.
look, am I in agreement that we should continue the draft planning of the budget as opposed to getting stuck here? Yeah, of course, we should continue the draft planning of the budget as long as we can discuss further. The overall numbers are something that I'm thinking about. Like Mr. Smith said and Mr. Block, we don't know the details yet. And I want to note, last year we came in at about 2.5% tax levy increase. No, that was the year before. I think it was 2.5. 1.99 was the year before. So about 2.5 last year, 1.99 the year before. Before that, pre-COVID, 2019-20, we were at almost 3%. And my overriding concern here is that there have been many moments in the past where Port Washington has been very frugal. And I think being financially responsible is fantastic, and we should make sure that our money is well spent. But I think that we should make sure that we are not so frugal that we are not able to do the programs that we want to do for children. And I'm worried about getting ourselves into that situation, because I think for the first time in many years here, we have a little breathing room because of the increased state aid we've gotten, because of the ARP funds, because of COVID. That 1.99 budget that we did 2 years ago was, in my opinion, a huge mistake. And, I know, I've said it over and over. We were saved by this extra influx of cash. And I just want to make sure that we are not squandering this opportunity to be back in a place where we can have real conversations about the dreams our superintendent has that he wants to fund. We have.
Okay, I'm just going to
vision stuff
interrupt you
underway.
because
I
need to interrupt you because we're talking about transfer to capital that has nothing to do with programming, has to do with so
At the end
need.
of the day, though, if our costs go through the roof and we have to pay our bills, those cuts come from programming. So I'm not suggesting that we.
Or the projects we put in transfer to capital, right? I understand what you're saying, but right now, what I'm trying to get a sense of is, can we go with the 2.1123 as a placeholder for transfer to capital?
Yes, I'm okay with proceeding
Okay,
with the
thank you.
draft process.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. But I just also want to be clear that we keep forgetting, we can as a board decide when we get a presentation from the administration that to stay at the tax cap, which is the same word as tax levy, that we are going to be at, this is what we get in programming. We as a board can say, no, we want to pierce the cap this year. And that would mean we want everything that we've talked about. So that's a different conversation. Right now, what we're asking is about transfer to capital. So we have that opportunity, and that is coming, that for us to talk about all the programming that we may want to add that is not being recommended, right? So there's a process for that too. Ms. Brooks, can I get your sense?
Yes, I've been here long enough to know that the roofs need to be done and we need money to do it, and the infrastructure is crumbling, and you can't really have healthy, educated children in buildings that are crumbling, so yes. I mean, you can, but it's really not ideal.
Thank you. Ms. Melkonian, your sense. Again, this is a sense, not a vote.
I am okay with starting here as long as we can go back if necessary.
Okay. Dr. Block, you've heard everybody. Are you okay?
All right, fine.
Okay, so Ms. O'Hara, I think you've heard the sense of the board to please proceed with your planning at 2.1123. Please round it up. That's actually my request because I'll never remember that. And we will proceed. If there are no further questions regarding this presentation, we will proceed with our discussion, and we will have our next conversation, full board, on March 22nd. That will be the presentation that you have on personnel and ELL, BOCES, driver's ed, and adult ed. Okay, let's move on to our committee reports. Policy and personnel, please.
I believe there hasn't been a meeting since the last time we had.
Next meeting is
Our
on
next
March
meeting
16th.
is a week from tomorrow,
Thank you.
9:30.
Budget and facilities, you haven't had a meeting since the last time, but or have you? Sorry, you did.
We had a meeting on 2/28. I wrote down 3/7, but that was when I made the notes. But we actually talked about the 3 action items, which were capital reserve, the transfer to capital, and actually, Emily, you wanted me to give you a segue to talk about the state budget. So that was it.
Thank you. So, yes, actually, I do have something that we talked about at the Budget and Facilities Committee meeting. We talked about what Port Washington has received so far in the executive budget with regards to state aid. And right now, what the executive budget shows for Port Washington is basically just half of the foundation aid that we are still owed. This is why I said 2.3 before, right? I was right? So it's half of the foundation aid this year of $2.3 million. We have received some other aid, right? So what is our total number right now in the executive budget?
So the total number is 15,354,000.
But what's the increase? I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. The increase is 2.585.
Of the 2.585 in increase, 2.3 is actually what is owed to us. So in fact, Port Washington has not received any increase in aid so far to date. Now, what I would like to get from the board is an approval for me to go and advocate to our legislators, which we have done in the past, to explain that although this budget has been advertised as a very strong budget for education, the Port Washington School District is not benefiting as other school districts. One of the reasons that we're not benefiting is because a big portion of the dollars that have been allocated and allocated for districts that are considered high need. And I would like to go and make the argument that COVID has made every district high need, and there is funding that should be given to all of us across the board, not just to certain. I am not going to be selfish in my discussions, and I do know that there are other districts that are more in need than us. But so that was the conversation that we had at the Budget and Facilities Committee. I told the Budget and Facilities Committee at the time that I would be bringing it to the general board to get a sense from everyone. I don't expect anybody to tell me, no, don't go advocate for more funds. But I just wanted everybody to be, unless, Dr. Block, you have an objection.
Fine.
So do you have a question?
I do. How, given the influx of money that we receive from the federal government, how has COVID made us a high-need district?
It hasn't. I said every district has been in high need. Every district has received money from the federal government. We didn't just get it.
Right, so
right?
how has that made us high need?
I'm saying that COVID has affected the needs of all school districts. I'm not saying high need. We're not high needs as far as the formula is concerned about what is a high need. I am saying that we have needs as well. And one of the things that the governor has allocated is mental health dollars. We have not received any mental health dollars, and yet you just heard Dr. Hines say that at his coffee, the big discussion was trauma and how are we handling trauma. Another aspect of the budget that has been a big push in her budget has been pre-K dollars. We are not getting any of those pre-K dollars. We had a discussion at the Budget Committee also about pre-K and how do we enhance our pre-K? Is there a better, can we open it up for more? So that's the type of conversations that I think we as a school district, as school board, should have with our legislators, which we've done in the past. We may not get what, from mental health, but we may be able to get extra funding somewhere. We have to make a presence to our legislators that we're not happy with this budget.
I agree with you. I just didn't understand exactly where COVID, I understand the mental health needs. I agree with you on that. But to me, the pre-K is separate and apart from COVID. So I think, I just wanted to understand.
There's also been learning loss dollars that we haven't got, right?
That's certainly related to COVID, yes. I'd actually like to hear more about the learning loss, because I think we've not heard about it to date. We've heard about it maybe anecdotally, but not district-wide in terms of how it's, I would like to actually see the data, to have it explained. But I understand what you're saying. I just didn't understand how, for example, pre-K ties into COVID. So I just wanted to understand what you meant by that.
Pre-K didn't, I was just saying what's
Okay.
in the budget,
I
but yes.
agree you
Okay,
should
so
ask it.
if everybody is okay with it, I'm going to go ahead and proceed by reaching out to legislators. Okay. Okay, I've been told I have to go to the approval of the minutes because there hasn't been a curriculum meeting, there hasn't been an audit committee meeting, and there hasn't been a legislative task force meeting. And we are going to be meeting on March 22nd again, and we'll get those dates then. So may I please have a motion to approve the minutes from February 15th Board of Education meeting, February 9th policy meeting, and February 28th Budget and Facilities meeting. Ms. Epstein, do I have a second? Ms. Brooks, all in favor? 7-0. Do I see Ms. Malconiano? I see your hand. Okay. Okay, now we are at our consent agenda. Does anybody have any questions before we go on to approve the consent agenda? Yes?
Is this in the consent agenda, the proposition?
Yes.
Oh. So, yeah, I want to talk about the wording of the proposition number 2, Facilities Improvement Program. I think the wording is actually really important to getting it passed. So I think we should consider, so one proposal that I would have on this. So right now it says proposition to establish a capital reserve fund to be known as the Facilities Improvement Program, Port Washington UFSD. And so I would think about changing the wording to Modern Ventilation and Facilities Improvement Program, just because I think that's what we're doing, and we want to make sure that we are sharing with our, with the community, all the benefits that this is going to have.
Ms. O'Hara, do you have anything on that? Or, I think this was run by Dr. Block, by our attorneys, and I think we did discuss this at the Budget and Facilities Committee. I know that you brought it up then, right?
We didn't discuss a proposed name. I had some opinions on the proposed name.
We had this.
I'm hearing the proposed name for the first time, and so I'm, I want to hear listen, I'm one person, I want to hear what the rest of the board thinks.
Okay. Mr. Smith, do you have anything to add to that?
I generally, I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't know if there's any implications or if you have a reason why not. Like, I don't have an opinion on it if you're asking me.
I think it's been,
Yeah.
it's gone to the newspapers, or it's been publicized, like we have by law, we have to publicize the proposition.
It hasn't gone to the newspapers yet because the board has to authorize it. So it was really to just keep it general, the title. But it's up to the board.
I understand. I believe that the wording that I'm proposing, it will make it more likely to pass, and I want to hear what the rest of the board thinks, whether they agree or not.
So Mr. Smith, you agree with Dr. Block's wording suggestion?
If I was given the choice in a vacuum, I would probably prefer, I think that.
So you would like to add modern ventilation and facilities improvement? So Dr. Block, you're asking.
Modernize, I think he said.
Maybe modernize. I mean, if you look into it, like, in order to add ACs, in order to improve ventilation, we need to improve the electrical, right? We need to improve electrical service. And I think the community cares about making sure, especially in COVID, that we have good ventilation. And I think this will highlight that. I am concerned that the capital fund is people are gonna have to like vote on another line. A lot of people abstain from voting on something they don't understand, and I think we wanna put it in the best light that we can.
Ms. Epstein?
So I guess we're at a crossroads in my mind, because my understanding of the intent and purpose of the proposition was such that it's to enhance and restore and renovate our current existing electrical and HVAC systems and remediate all of our current systems. Now, if at the end of that, whatever time period that may take, whatever position we're in, if at that time, whatever board is present, and they want to start going out and either doing a bond, or they've done an additional capital reserve for the modernization of ventilation, then that would be a whole nother conversation, or there'd be two other capital reserves or other things going on. I thought this was just to do the work of to renovate, update, and upgrade our current and existing ventilation and electrical systems. And if at the end of that we can do more, that's the next phase of the conversation.
Because that would cost $67 million.
So I guess I don't want to say that we're definitely doing something that we're not doing at this time. This capital reserve is saying, at the end of the day, if we raise the $15 million and we're able to, upgrade our ventilation and our electrical system, we may say, hey, it's great, it's all working fine, and we don't need to do anything else. So by saying we're doing more or modernizing the ventilation, I think it gives the impression that some of the expectations of air conditioning are going to happen. And I don't know that we as a board have had that discussion yet. Or even, and if we have had that discussion, then maybe this proposition needs to be totally different, and the dollar amount would be different then, and the long-term planning would be different. I think what this does is it sets us up in a good place where we need to be from an electrical standpoint and from a ventilation standpoint in an appropriate period of time, so that then we can plan for whatever the next thing is by the time we raise this money.
But remember, this is just creating the account to start depositing the funds, right? And $15 million gets you way past just the electric. So, and we may not ever get anywhere close. Like Ristano gave us the budgets for the electric, and it's nowhere near $15 million. So you could get the electric done and like a good way started on some of those tier 1 ventilation projects.
But it says unit ventilators, furnishings, air handling, the
Yeah.
electrical is not the only part of
That's
this.
the whole point, right?
Right,
So that's
but
what I'm
it's
saying.
not central air.
Well, I mean, air handlers are by definition.
No, but
central
we
air.
have them already. We have central air here, right? So that's
But
what,
not
is
in-
that?
But not
is-
in 5 of the other schools.
Yes,
but
in every building, we
in
have
some-
central
In some
air.
buildings.
Right,
In some,
every
sorry, in
building.
some rooms, not in most of the
Right, we have
rooms.
one common area in every building that has central air. That was
Yeah.
part of the bond.
Right, so I don't understand what you're talking
So
about.
I'm saying we have, this is for maintenance.
No, it's not.
Okay,
This
Ms.
is,
O'Hara.
this is for capital improvement,
Oh.
by definition.
Sorry, so it's for ventilation. There's about $6 million worth of ventilation that needs to be addressed. And then there's 3.6 million related to the electrical service upgrades.
Could you explain what that 6 million ventilation means, please? Which ventilation?
So it's the fresh air that comes into the buildings. There's certain rooms that could be improved. So it's addressing that at all of the buildings district-wide.
So it's not air conditioning.
No one, but he said modernized
So-
ventilation.
So facilities, when I read facilities improvement program, that makes me want to go to sleep. And ventilation makes me want to vote for it because I want to improve I want to improve ventilation for our kids amidst COVID. So I think I think a different name will increase our vote count. That's why I'm supporting it.
So you're saying modernize, so instead of saying facilities improvement, modernize ventilation and facilities improvement program.
Yeah, or just ventilation and facilities improvement program is probably pithier.
Okay. Ms. Gilliar.
I understand the landscape correctly, right, we have rules about creating the fund and how we have to describe the fund, and that we have to describe the fund with specificity, and the fact that it's a capital reserve fund, which is one of the types of funds that we can do. I'm not aware of any restrictions on what we call it, as long as we're clear to the taxpayers about all of those things. And so to my mind, the suggestion that Mr. Block is making, Dr. Block, sorry, is that we word it in such a way that the uneducated on this issue voter reads it and thinks, oh, I'm in favor of education, I'm obviously in favor of that too, check. Not, I don't know what that is and they're spending more money, no. And so to that extent, I support his suggestion. Maybe that's not the exact wording, but maybe we have a conversation about what the wording is. And I like the word modernize. Maybe ventilation doesn't need to be in there, but we're describing it with the specificity required by law already. So we don't really have to debate whether or not the name that he's suggested is reflecting what the fund is. I think it is. We just need to settle on a name together.
When does the advertising have to be in the paper? Is it March 31st? Is that the date? What was it?
Yeah, I don't have the exact date, but it's
March 31st is the document that we were sent, right? March 31st.
All right, if that's what it says, it has to
I
be-
think so.
Okay.
So
But
we
we could decide tonight, right? Like,
That's what I'm saying.
Right, let's just settle it and cross it out and move on.
Well, I think we have to I think we would have to pull it, and we would have to redo the proposition and vote on it at March 22nd, and then it could be in the paper by March 31st.
Why do we have to pull it if
Yeah.
it's just a naming issue,
yeah, I don't-
right? I don't know that we need to pull it if we feel adequately informed on the naming issue. Right? The only reason I could see that we would pull it is if we think for some reason we need legal advice on whether or not we can add the word modernize. I mean, I'm comfortable going rogue.
I'm sorry, there's a
Without
whole
counsel on that.
resolution that has been set up and has been written by our attorneys, I believe, or in consultation with our attorneys. So I will pull the item. I do not want to vote on it with us just picking words out because it's everywhere. This facilities
They can use
improvement.
find replace for when it's everywhere.
What?
I think you'd be okay with just renaming it. And if you say anywhere that it says Facilities Improvement Program 1 is replaced with
Okay,
whatever
so
we
what's
come
the
up with.
suggestion for the word? So, Dr. Block, go ahead, give us the word.
So I had said modernize ventilation and facilities improvement program, but so that's the proposal.
Everybody okay with that? Yes?
Or how about update and upgrade? Or do you just want to keep it modernized? I understand the public relations bent on this. I understand trying to educate the public through the title of the fund.
The whole proposition is going to be on the ballot and all the wording is going to be there, right? So anybody who wants,
And who is going to repass the title? I mean, you're in advertising, right? So marketing, I think it's important for the big bold letters I would love for people to read it, but I think we have to be realistic. So-
actually, if you want my opinion, I think adding the word modernized ventilation will turn a lot of community members off. If you want to know about how, because, we're talking about right now are what the parents, and I understand that. But when we present a budget, we are not presenting it just to the parents. We are presenting it to the entire community of registered voters in Port Washington. So I believe, my opinion, that a facilities improvement program speaks to the entire community. And I believe that's how, but I will go with the consensus of the board. But in my opinion, wording-wise, that's what we're doing. We're improving facilities, and it is electrical, it is ventilation, it is a lot of things, but saying modernize ventilation in my mind, and I've heard from community members who've heard our budget and facilities meetings, who think that means air conditioning, central air, and are not in support of that. So I just want us to be careful that we don't speak to one audience and turn off the other audience. That's my opinion, but again, I'm one person of 7, so I will go with the entire board. So I'm going to go back, so now that you got my opinion, Ms.
So I had suggested update and upgrade. I don't know if that's too wordy, but.
Facilities Improvement Program means exactly that, update and upgrade. So I'm asking again, are you okay?
I mean, what about facilities modernization and improvement program? Because I think what Dr. Block is getting at is the idea that improvement doesn't sound so dramatic, and modernization sounds like we're really up to something.
Ventilation is important to me. I think that's the key word that I think people are going to support.
And I think if you put modernization of facilities, we better put some darn fabulous bathrooms in all of our facilities, and it better sparkle everywhere, is what I think it says.
Okay, so I'm going down the line again. So Dr. Block still wants ventilation. You're okay with modernized ventilation?
I really don't feel strongly. I don't really.
Ms. Epstein, are you okay? What is your sense?
I really like it as it's worded, so I'm not changing my vote.
Okay, Ms. Gilliar.
I mean, we're about to be all over the place, and so maybe we'll end up having to table this, as you first said, but the ventilation is less important to me, and I do agree with your point, Ms. Bays, that there's a lot of stuff in here besides just the ventilation, but I see Dr. Block's point about wanting to tweak the wording a little bit.
No, I think Dr. Block wants the word ventilation. So I'm asking you, do you want the word ventilation?
This is why I'm saying we're all over the place, right? Because I agree with some of the board that ventilation makes it sound like it's just about ventilation, and we have to make it clear that it's about everything. But I see his other overarching point about trying to tweak the wording so it appeals to voters, because I think that is a secondary point, even though to him, the ventilation part is the part that appeals to voters.
But I believe that the word Facilities Improvement Program is exactly what this is. It's a Facilities Improvement Program. And it lists, the proposition lists exactly what we would be improving in facilities, right? Doesn't list roofs, because we're going to be taking care of roofs and transfer to capital. So I need us to just either agree that we're calling it Facilities Improvement Program, or if we can't agree, I'm going to pull it, and we're going to have to come up with but I'm trying to get a sense. Ms. Brooks?
I can split the baby and do facilities/ventilation improvement program.
Okay,
I'm
pulling it.
If we're trying to get the public to understand what it is by the title, then, and Dr. Block wants the ventilation aspect in, it's a compromise. I wasn't trying to be funny. I'm trying to reach a compromise so we can move forward.
Okay, Ms. Melkonian, did you leave? I can't see you. This new table setup here is not good for me and you, by the way. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm going to put you in the front.
I think Ms. Brooks makes a good suggestion.
Okay, the suggestion from Ms. Brooks is calling it, say it again, Deborah?
Facilities/ventilation improvement program, just adding /ventilation.
That works for me.
You okay with that? Well, we're 3-4, so right now it's 3.
Rachel, jump on board.
Both names are terrible.
Are you abstaining?
No, I'm always going to have an opinion. They're both terrible. So then it's tabled.
I'm going, this, okay, we're going to pull,
Or else we vote on it right now.
We're 4-3. I don't have to vote on it. One,
I feel like Rachel's gonna come over.
Then pull it out of consent, and then.
well, no,
Just
if
to
we're
get
4,
this thing moving.
but Rachel, I need you to vote, actually. No,
Because it's
we're,
part of consent,
yeah,
you can't
you
ask
got, I can't, I'm gonna pull it out of consent, and I'm gonna need you to vote on it.
Okay.
Because it's either or at this point. I mean, okay?
Right.
And if, okay. No. So here's what we're doing, guys. We are pulling 11.1. Oh, we have to pull a whole bunch of stuff. Hold on a minute. Bear with me. I don't know where it is. Sorry, everybody. We'll get this. We are pulling 11.1.
We don't have to pull two. No, it's
Just 11.1?
Just 11.1.
Okay. We are pulling 11.1. So for consent, we're going to do a separate vote for 11.1. So for consent, may I have a motion? Somebody make the motion. I'm giving you the numbers. 11.1 to -2 and 11.3.1 to 11.6.2. Again, a motion for 11.1-2 and 11.3.1 to 11.6.2. Do I have a motion?
Sure.
That's right. Why are you looking at me like that? Ms. Epstein makes a motion. I'm pulling.
11.1.2.
I did.
Dash, but you keep putting a dash in.
Oh,
But
okay.
I had it that way, that's fine. It's fine.
Do I have a second? Ms. Brooks, all in favor? That is 7-0. Okay. We are going to vote separately on 11.1, which is on this Proposition 2. So I am going to take, so we have, the vote is going to be on whether or not you approve this resolution as it is currently stated, which means it is stated as Facilities Improvement Program Number 1. So I'm going to go down the line. I'm going to start at the other end just because my neck is hurting. So Ms. Malconian, your vote on Proposition Number 2, which is 11.1 item on the agenda. It's a yay or nay the way it's currently written. It's yay or nay.
So we're not changing, we're going.
If you vote yes and it wins, we're keeping it how it is. If it fails, then we have to go back and redo it
And
That's-
and rename it.
and rename it, yeah.
Okay. So I think it would be helpful to be renamed, so I'm saying no.
Ms. Brooks.
It's 11.1.1, no.
Ms. Gilliar. Ding, dong, 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 dong.
If we rediscuss this, we will put it on the next one.
It has to be on the next agenda because it has to be advertised by March 31st. Our next meeting is March 22nd. So I don't know where we would be discussing it because we have no other public meetings.
All right, I'm a yes.
I'm a yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Okay, it's a 4-3. The proposition passes, the resolution passes, and it stays as is. I'm sorry to the noes. We were split, but we are not a board that just stamps things down.
It's democracy. It's good. It's a good thing.
Oh, wait. Okay, sorry, Dr. Block. We did it. Okay, now we're going to old business. We have the answer of community comment questions. So the first question was, will the district increase supplies and materials at all levels and take the onus off of HSAs, PTAs? Dr. Hines, I think you were going to answer this.
Yes, I am. So what I'd like to do is to bring it back to the presidents and principals meeting and have a discussion at our next meeting about this and then report back to the board.
Thank you. Will the district provide more for the pre-K funding? You again, Dr. Hines.
At this time, no.
But we do have a presentation for pre-K coming at some point after the budget, right? We
We
had
do.
something.
We do, and it's a whole different conversation related to the program we have and potentially what the next steps are, but at this moment, it's no.
And another one for Dr. Hines. Regarding the Northwell partnership, what are the parameters of the relationship? How will they have access to students, and how far along are you in negotiations with Northwell to bring this to our schools? Could you please clarify?
I can, and I'll do this very quickly. So there are different programs that Northwell offers, and I think they're being conflated together. I want to be very clear, the one that we are looking at and we're piloting in one of our schools has to do with our staff, and it's a holistic approach to dealing with stress and dealing with anxiety. So for example, they come in and they assist working with our staff with yoga, mindfulness, those sorts of things. So it's not the program, a different program that other districts are using right now, and has to do with assisting our staff at this moment to deal with anxiety and stress.
And Dr. Hines, I just want to have a follow-up on that. If we were to ever go in a different direction, we would have a conversation in public before we went ahead and did something like that?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, we're moving on to new business. Ms. Epstein, you have a new business. Go right ahead.
Yes. Hopefully this will be a brief conversation, but yet engaging, As we all know, the governor has her emergency orders still in effect, and unless and until those orders are in effect, we are to meet as committee, we can still meet virtually. So we have been having our committee meetings virtually under those auspices, right? What the end of that executive order is coming to play on the 16th of March unless it is extended. I'd like to open it up for conversation with the board to say, in light of our ever-changing, moving out of COVID world, regardless of that 16th date, how do we feel about moving our committee meetings from the virtual to the in-person? And before you answer, I have a question first for Dr. Hines. Dr. Hines, if the Board of Education wanted to live stream their meetings from the conference room, would we have that flexibility to do that moving forward?
All right, well, first of all, live stream is a curse word, and we're not allowed to say that anymore. But in all seriousness, yes, I'm working that out with Mr. Maloney.
Okay, thank you. Go for it, everyone. It's a free-for-all. How do you feel?
I mean, my personal preference is to keep them remote, just for practicality, for those of us that have many other things going on, and have to be in the city every day. It's just much easier to be a part of more committees if I don't have to give up half a day to be here just for an hour meeting. So my strong personal preference, just selfishly, is to keep them on remote. And I also think that everybody being at their own computer with their own camera in front of their face makes the meetings much more accessible to the community members who watch them. It's much easier to understand. For those who watch them remotely, it's much easier to see somebody's face fully when they're talking, them speaking into their mic, rather than this setup, which is really unwatchable. And I'm sure it'll be the same in the conference room. So I think just for recording them for posterity and for the 40, 50 people who watch them on Zoom later, it's a much better format for those who watch,
Provided that we're allowed to, right?
Of course.
Because you recognize.
Obviously.
Okay. I
Yeah,
just want
that's
to make
right.
sure that we're all on the same page on
Yeah.
that, because.
As long as the option is available.
Dr. Block, I know your answer. I'm not even asking, I'm skipping over you.
Online.
Ms. Gillier.
His vote is cancel them all. One large meeting, done. So I agree with many of the points that Mr. Smith made. I mean, this seems actually almost silly to have this conversation right now, because literally in 1 week we'll know if this is actually an issue or not an issue, right?
I'm just going to add, I do not think this is going to be extended. So I think this was really, I'm sensing from Ms. Epstein a kind of warning to all of us that this is expiring on March 16th. and that we are going to have to transition to in-person meetings. I understand that some of us work full-time, but yeah, if we have an option, I think we've all discussed, and I think that there is it definitely becomes easier, although I do think we miss out. I mean, I've gone to all of Mike's coffees, and they're called Caffeine with Mike, so I'll say Mike's coffees. And I think that it's nice to have, be in the conference room and to actually interact with humans again, and actually, it's kind of what you referred to back in the day, where we would, linger in the conference room and talk to people and have a little interaction, and it's engaging in a very different way than when we have our committee meetings and then go to community comments. When we have our committee meetings, we do go to community comments when we're in person, but when the person is actually sitting across from me, I kind of sense from their facial expressions, I get a sense of where they're, so I would like to go back to in-person. I respect everybody but this is the job we signed up for, and we unfortunately need to be ready. So I'd like to be in person if we can, but.
So the answer I was trying to give you was, first, I think it's kind of silly that we're having this conversation, because literally it's March 8th, and on March 16th, 8 days from now, we may not actually have this as a choice, and so why are we wasting any time discussing it?
Well, we actually are not, because we have a budget meeting, which we would have to go in person immediately. So, no, we're not, right? Before our next board meeting, which is March 22nd.
Right, but if we legally have to do it, we
Right.
would just do it,
Well,
right?
we all need to be aware of it.
Okay. It was posed as, what are our feelings and opinions? So since we're just talking about our hopes and dreams, I think there are pros and cons to both, right? I agree with all the points that Mr. Smith made. I think it makes it accessible to a lot of the community for whom getting to a morning meeting is difficult. But I agree with your points too. There's something very nice about being able to continue a conversation with a community member after the meeting in an informal way about something. It's bridge building. It's nice for us to see each other in person. There are good things about both. I mean, if I was making up my ideal world, I would probably have a mix of the two, because I think having morning meetings in person excludes some of the community. And the other thing is, if I was making the decision, if I actually had the power to make the decision, I'd want to know what our technology was at the time, because before this, we were podcasting. And one of the reasons that we were podcasting was because we were told live streaming was financially and equipment-wise onerous, because we would need a person to be coming to do it, and it was just going to be expensive and kind of a debacle. So if we're also
Definitely evolved from that.
Yeah, I hope so.
We have, right? We've got those good old cameras ready.
But
So
I guess
we've
look,
evolved.
we'll see what happens, right?
Ms. Brooks, do you have anything to add?
I think there are people who participate remotely who will not go into the closed conference room, who feel that it is not safe for them to do so still, no matter what the rest of the world is doing. And I guess they would have to be remote anyway. So that's just my one comment as to the people who you think might come. They might not. I mean, just because it's there, and they might not come. I've actually, I think functioning remotely, and I'll go with what Ms. Gilliard has said, has its pluses and its minuses. For me, with a very paper-intensive as policy is, because of the way I've structured it with bringing in sample policies and NISPA templates, it's been very economically, it's been more environmentally friendly for me to function from my desktop and not have to print everything out and be able to look at the screen and pull something up when I'm trying to look at this document or that document. Obviously, that stuff would need to be printed out, and it should be printed out for other participants there. So understanding that that's a logistical issue, I think that if, so I'm torn. I really am. And I also think that I would want live streaming, good quality live streaming, to be in place before I would want to go back to being live. The podcast, they were okay, but I think people, because even for me, when I go back and I need to look at the minutes, it's very helpful to see what people have said, what community comments have been, to be able to go back and review that, so I don't miss anything going forward. So I would want that in place. I think we've gotten to the
So
place where we can't go
I'm
back from
sensing
that.
so far that I'm sensing, and I know Ms. Malcone, I didn't get to you, but I'm sensing that if we had the choice, I think we would probably all want to be able to have the opportunity, the sense is, to stay remote. Maybe leave it to each committee to decide. I mean, maybe all committees aren't, but I'm getting the sense that we all have mixed feelings about that. But Ms. Malcone, unless you have anything different to add, I don't want to just belabor this conversation because it may not be in our control, because as of March 16th, we might have no choice. But go ahead, I don't want to take away anything.
That was my point. I don't know why we're having this conversation.
We're having it so that we could all just be aware, I guess, and get a sense of how we feel going forward. Because we do have the power to not meet remotely, right? We can decide today as a board, if we wanted to, that as of next committee meeting, we're going to be in person. Okay, moving on. We have another opportunity for the community to be heard. Please run to the podium. Come on. You sat here through all of this and you have nothing to say? Okay, don't. Okay. No community comments, and recess to executive if anybody would like. No, we are adjourned. May I have a motion, please, for adjournment? Ms. Epstein, all in favor? 7-0. Our next meeting is on March 22nd.
You got a seconded with Adam Smith. He seconded it.
Adam Smith seconded the motion to adjourn.